My name is Elena Ruiz. I'm 30 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my father called me the affair child. He said my green eyes were proof. Proof that my mother had betrayed him. Proof that I didn't belong in his family. Proof that every birthday he barely acknowledged, every cold glance across the dinner table, every whispered insult when he thought no one else could hear, it was all justified. Because according to him, I was the living evidence of my mother's greatest sin. For 28 years, my father insisted I wasn't his daughter. For 28 years, my mother swore she had never cheated. And for 28 years, our entire extended family quietly took sides. But 3 months ago, when my father demanded I take a DNA test before he would attend my wedding, I finally agreed. Not because I wanted his approval. Not because I wanted to prove myself to him. But because I wanted the truth. And when the results came back, they didn't just prove my father wrong about the affair. They proved something none of us had ever imagined. The DNA test showed that I wasn't his daughter. But I also wasn't my mother's. And what we discovered about the hospital where I was born would make my father collapse to his knees in front of our entire family. Before we go any further, if you enjoy stories about family secrets, hidden truths, and moments when the truth finally comes out after years of silence, consider subscribing to Women Reddit Stories. And if this story resonates with you at any point, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always read them. Now let me take you back 6 weeks. Back to the night everything finally began to unravel. It was a Sunday dinner at my parents' house in San Antonio, Texas. My father loved that house. A massive Spanish-style home in an upscale neighborhood with terracotta roofs, tall arched windows, and a courtyard filled with lemon trees he liked to brag he'd planted himself. Built this life from nothing, he would say to anyone who would listen. And I'll protect it from lies. The dining room looked like something out of a magazine. Dark walnut table. Crystal glasses. Porcelain plates my mother polished every Saturday afternoon. My grandmother sat at the head of the table, her silver hair pinned neatly into a bun. My older brother Daniel, the golden child, scrolled quietly through his phone while pretending to listen to our father's story about some new business deal. And my mother, Sophia, sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap the way she always did when she sensed a storm coming. Because my father had storms. Sudden ones. Violent ones. The kind that could turn a peaceful dinner into a battlefield in seconds. Halfway through the meal, my father cleared his throat. The room fell silent. "Elena," he said. Just hearing my name in that tone made my stomach tighten. "Yes?" He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands together. "I won't be attending your wedding." My mother's fork slipped from her hand and clattered against the plate. "Carlos," she whispered. "Please." But he ignored her. Instead, he reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a folded document. Then he slid it across the table toward me. "I've given this a lot of thought," he said calmly. "I refuse to walk another man's daughter down the aisle." The words hit the room like a gunshot. I looked down at the paper. It was a consent form for a DNA paternity test. His name was already signed at the bottom. "You have 6 weeks," he continued. "Take the test. Share the results with the family." He paused, watching me carefully. "If the results prove you're mine, I'll apologize. I'll attend the wedding. I'll walk you down the aisle myself." Then he smiled. The same cold smile I'd seen my entire life. "But we both know what the results will show." Across the table, my grandmother's teacup hit the saucer with a sharp crack. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Daniel stared down at his plate like he wished he could disappear. And I sat there staring at my father's gold watch glinting under the chandelier light. Thinking about the same thing I had thought so many times before. 28 years. He had been building toward this moment for 28 years. I didn't sign the paper that night. But I didn't walk out either. Instead, I folded the document carefully and placed it beside my plate. Thank you for the reminder, Carlos, I said quietly. I'll remember this. I should probably explain why that moment didn't shock me. By the time I was 30, I had learned something about my father. His cruelty followed patterns. Predictable ones. I was 8 years old the first time I realized I was different. I had been walking down the hallway when I heard my parents arguing in their bedroom. The door wasn't fully closed. And my father's voice was sharp enough to cut through the house. Look at her eyes, he said angrily. Green. Where did those come from? My mother's voice was shaking. Carlos, please. Certainly not from me. I didn't understand everything they were saying. But I understood enough. At 13, when I asked to join the school soccer team, my father refused to sign the permission slip. I'm not spending money on someone else's kid, he said in front of Daniel. 2 days later, Daniel got brand new cleats. At 18, Daniel went to the University of Texas. My father paid for everything. Tuition. Apartment. Car. Monthly allowance. When I got accepted into nursing school, my father didn't even look up from his newspaper. Your real father can pay for it. So I worked 2 jobs. Took out loans. Graduated 5 years later with a degree and $60,000 in debt. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was what his accusations did to my mother. Every disagreement they ever had somehow circled back to me. Bills. Vacations. Daniel's career. Everything ended with the same accusation. You know why this family is broken, Sophia. And then he would look at me. Like I was a stain that refused to wash away. The night before I left for college, my grandmother pulled me aside in the kitchen. She held my wrist tightly. Keep every document from the hospital where you were born, she said. Your birth certificate. Every piece of paperwork. I frowned. Why? She hesitated. Then she said something that didn't make sense at the time. Because one day, Elena, you might need proof of the truth. I kept the documents. For 18 years they sat untouched in a folder inside my closet. Until the night my father slid that DNA test across the table. And everything changed. That night, I drove back to my apartment in Austin, the folded DNA consent form sitting on the passenger seat like it was judging me. The highway lights blurred past the windshield while my mind replayed the dinner over and over again. 28 years. 28 years of suspicion, accusations, and quiet humiliation. And now my father wanted proof. Not just proof for himself. Proof for everyone. Because Carlos Ruiz never did anything privately. If he was going to destroy someone, he wanted an audience. When I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building, the light was still on in the living room. Nathan was waiting. He looked up the moment I walked in, his laptop balanced on his knees and blueprints scattered across the coffee table. Nathan Miller designed houses for a living, and lately he'd been working non-stop on a new project downtown. But the second he saw my face, he closed the laptop. What did he do this time? He asked gently. I dropped my purse onto the chair and sat beside him on the couch. Then I handed him the paper. He read it once. Then again. And then he let out a long breath. A DNA test? Before the wedding, I said. Nathan leaned back against the couch. That man really can't help himself, can he? I shook my head. He said he won't come unless I take it. Nathan studied me carefully. So take it. I looked at him. You think I should? I think, he said slowly, you deserve to shut him up forever. I stared down at the engagement ring on my finger. Nathan had designed it himself. A simple oval diamond set in a thin gold band. Not flashy. Not extravagant. Just exactly what I had once described to him in a half-joking conversation years earlier. Nathan noticed my hesitation. Elena, he said softly, you've spent your whole life living under his accusation. I know. So end it. I exhaled slowly. It's not about proving him wrong anymore. Nathan frowned. What do you mean? It's about freeing my mother. Nathan went quiet. He knew what I meant. 5 years earlier, my grandmother had called me in the middle of the night. 2 o'clock in the morning. Her voice was shaking. Your mother took too many sleeping pills, she said. The ambulance had arrived in time. Barely. After that, my mother started therapy. Antidepressants. Weekly counseling sessions. But my father never apologized. Not once. He just continued repeating the same thing he'd said for decades. I know the truth. And somehow, he had convinced himself that cruelty was the same thing as righteousness. I picked up my phone and opened a genetics laboratory website I had bookmarked months earlier. Trueline Diagnostics. Private. Certified. And most importantly, completely independent. I'll take the test, I said. Nathan nodded. But not the one he wants. 2 weeks later, my father turned 60. The party was held at the San Antonio Country Club. My father loved that place. 18 holes of perfectly trimmed green stretching across the Texas landscape. White pillars. Crystal chandeliers. A private dining room overlooking the golf course. Nearly 40 relatives attended. Aunts. Uncles. Cousins I hadn't seen in years. Everyone who mattered to Carlos Ruiz. Nathan squeezed my hand as we walked inside. 2 hours, he whispered. We can survive 2 hours. I nodded. But I already knew we wouldn't. Halfway through dinner, after 3 glasses of expensive Cabernet, my father stood up. He lifted his wine glass. I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight, he began. Polite applause followed. He smiled and nodded toward my brother. Daniel has been doing incredible work with the company. Daniel raised his glass awkwardly. Then my father turned to my mother. And Sophia, of course. 35 years of patience. A few relatives laughed. Then his eyes moved toward me. And Elena is here tonight. The way he said my name made the room shift slightly. Like everyone suddenly realized something unpleasant was about to happen. I understand she's been thinking about our conversation. My brother stiffened beside him. Dad. But my father waved him off. No, no. This is family. We should be honest with our family. Then he looked straight at me. You know what they call a bird that lays its eggs in another bird's nest? Silence. A cuckoo. A few uncomfortable chuckles scattered around the table. The cuckoo egg looks beautiful, he continued. Perfect even. He tilted his glass toward me. But it doesn't belong. My mother stared down at the table. A tear slid down her cheek and dropped onto her bracelet. My grandmother's expression hardened like stone. And I felt something inside me finally go still. I placed my napkin on the table. Then I stood up. The room turned toward me. Thank you for the reminder, Carlos, I said calmly. I'll remember this. Then I turned to my mother. Mom, I said gently. Would you like to step outside with me for a minute? She looked up at me, surprised. Then she nodded. We walked out of the dining room together. Past the whispering relatives. Past the bar. Past the man who had spent 28 years trying to convince the world I didn't belong to him. Outside, the warm Texas night wrapped around us. My mother leaned against the railing and covered her face with her hands. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I put my arm around her shoulders. You don't need to apologize. Yes, I do, she said. You've suffered because of me your entire life. That's not true. She looked at me with red eyes. He's never believed me. I know. Footsteps approached behind us. My grandmother. She moved quickly despite being nearly 80. Elena, she said urgently. I turned. Her sharp eyes scanned the parking lot before she spoke again. There's something I should have told you years ago. My mother frowned. Mom, what are you talking about? My grandmother lowered her voice. The night you were born. I felt my stomach tighten. What about it? She glanced back toward the building. Then she said something that changed everything. Something strange happened at the hospital that night. My mother straightened. What do you mean? The nurse who brought you to us, my grandmother said slowly. She was terrified. Terrified? I repeated. She handed you to your mother and left the room almost immediately. My grandmother reached into her purse. Then she pulled out an old folded piece of paper. Yellowed with age. I made a copy of the birth record before the hospital sealed the files, she said. My heart started pounding. I looked down at the document. Time of birth, 11:42 p.m. My mother shook her head. That can't be right. What do you mean? I asked. She looked at the paper again. I remember the clock in the delivery room, she said slowly. The doctor joked that you almost made it to midnight. My grandmother's voice dropped. What time was it? My mother swallowed. 11:53. 11 minutes. Something had happened in those 11 minutes. And suddenly my father's accusation didn't feel like the real mystery anymore. Something else did. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I hadn't slept much. My mind had spent the entire night replaying the same number over and over again. 11 minutes. 11 minutes between the time on my birth record and the time my mother remembered. 11 minutes where something might have happened. Something big enough that my grandmother had quietly kept a copy of the hospital record for nearly 30 years. I got out of bed and walked into the kitchen of our apartment. Nathan was already there, standing at the stove in sweatpants and a t-shirt, making coffee. He glanced at me. You didn't sleep either, huh? I shook my head. No. He poured 2 mugs and slid one toward me. So, he said carefully, tell me what your grandmother told you after I left last night. I wrapped my hands around the mug. Then I told him everything. The terrified nurse. The old birth record. The time discrepancy. Nathan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back against the counter. That sounds like a hospital mistake. A mistake that lasted 30 years? I asked. He shrugged slightly. Maybe it was never discovered. I stared down at the coffee. But something inside me said that wasn't true. Hospitals keep records. Doctors double-check charts. Newborns wear identification bands. Mistakes don't usually stay hidden for decades. Unless someone wants them to. I reached for my phone and pulled up the website for True Line Diagnostics again. I'm doing the DNA test today. Nathan nodded. Good. But I'm doing 3 tests. He frowned. 3? 1 for me, I said. 1 for my mother. And 1 for my father. Nathan raised an eyebrow. How are you getting that last one? I smiled slightly. Carlos Ruiz sheds hair like a golden retriever. 2 days later, I walked into the True Line Diagnostics office in downtown Austin carrying 3 sealed envelopes. The receptionist directed me to a private consultation room. A few minutes later, a woman in a white lab coat entered. She looked to be in her early 40s with calm eyes and a reassuring voice. Good morning, she said. I'm Dr. Patel. I shook her hand. Elena Ruiz. She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. What can we help you with today? I slid the envelopes across the table. I need a paternity and maternity analysis. Dr. Patel glanced at the labels. 3 samples? Yes. She studied me for a moment. This is usually done with consent from all parties. My mother consented, I said. And the 3rd sample? I hesitated. Then I said simply, "My father won't." Dr. Patel looked at me quietly for a moment. Then she nodded. "The results will take about 3 weeks. Can they be expedited?" "They can." "Do it." She made a few notes on the paperwork. Then she looked back up. "Are you prepared for whatever the results show?" I thought about my father. About 28 years of accusations. About my mother crying quietly in the kitchen late at night. About the 11 missing minutes at the hospital. "Yes," I said. "I am." 3 days later, I tried calling the nurse my grandmother had mentioned. Her name was Margaret Collins. She had been the head nurse on duty the night I was born at St. Augustine Medical Center in San Antonio. My grandmother had managed to track down her address years ago. And eventually, her phone number. The call rang 6 times before someone answered. "Hello?" Her voice was elderly but sharp. "Mrs. Collins?" I said. "Yes. My name is Elena Ruiz." There was a pause. "I was born at St. Augustine Medical Center on June 14, 1996. Silence. "You were the head nurse that night." The silence stretched. Then her voice changed. Tight. Defensive. "I can't help you." "Please," I said. "I just need to ask." "I don't know what you're talking about." "But." "Don't call this number again." The line went dead. I stared at my phone. Nathan looked up from his laptop across the room. "What happened?" "She hung up." "What did she say?" "That she couldn't help me." Nathan frowned. "That's it?" "No." I slowly set the phone on the table. She sounded scared. Nathan leaned back. "Scared?" "Yes." An innocent person would have been confused. Maybe even curious. Margaret Collins hadn't sounded confused. She had sounded terrified. Which meant one thing. She knew something. And whatever it was, she had been carrying it for nearly 30 years. 4 days later, my father sent an email. Not to me. To the entire family. 42 recipients. Aunts. Uncles. Cousins. My mother. My grandmother. Even Nathan. The subject line read, "Regarding Elena's wedding." I opened it while sitting in the hospital break room during my lunch shift. My hands started shaking before I even finished the first paragraph. "Dear family. For 28 years I have endured whispers and doubts about my concerns regarding Elena's true parentage. I recently asked Elena to take a DNA test before her wedding so the truth could finally come to light. So far she has refused. I believe her silence speaks for itself." My chest tightened. I kept reading. "Until the truth is acknowledged publicly, I will not attend the wedding. I hope you all understand my position." Then came the attachment. A photograph. I recognized it immediately. My christening. I was 3 months old in the picture. Blonde hair. Green eyes. Pale skin. Standing in a room full of dark-haired Ruiz relatives. My father had circled my face in red ink. Underneath he had typed 3 words. "Spot the difference." I sat there staring at the screen for a long time. Then my phone started buzzing. Messages from relatives. Questions. Curious comments. A few sympathetic ones. But most of them sounded exactly like the whispers I had heard my entire life. Maybe Carlos was right. My brother called that evening. "Elena," he said immediately. "Just do what he wants." I laughed. Not because it was funny. But because it was the same thing Daniel had said my entire life. "Why?" "So this can stop." "You mean so Dad can be right?" Daniel sighed. "You're making this worse." "Am I?" "You're embarrassing the family." I hung up before I said something I would regret. 3 weeks after I submitted the DNA samples, the email from Trueline Diagnostics arrived. It came at 9:12 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Nathan was out of town meeting with a client. I was alone in the apartment. The subject line read, DNA analysis results, secure document. My heart started pounding. I opened the file. And then I read it. Once. Then twice. Then a third time. Because the first 2 times my brain refused to process what it was seeing. Subject A, Elena Ruiz. Subject B, Carlos Ruiz. Genetic match, 0%. I exhaled slowly. That part wasn't surprising. I had expected it. But then I looked at the next line. And the world tilted. Subject A, Elena Ruiz. Subject C, Sofia Ruiz. Genetic match, 0%. My hands started shaking. I stared at the screen again. 0%. Not my father's daughter. And not my mother's either. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the screen. The numbers didn't change. No matter how many times I blinked. No matter how many times I scrolled up and down the page. 0% match with Carlos Ruiz. 0% match with Sofia Ruiz. My entire identity, 30 years of it, had just been erased by 2 lines of scientific data. I grabbed my phone and called the laboratory. It rang twice before someone answered. Trueline Diagnostics, this is Dr. Patel. This is Elena Ruiz, I said quickly. I just received my results. Yes, Ms. Ruiz. I was expecting your call. My heart skipped. You were? Yes. I swallowed. There has to be a mistake. I understand why you'd think that, she said calmly. But we verified the samples 3 separate times. Contamination? No. Lab error? No. She paused. The results are conclusive. I pressed my hand against my forehead. So you're telling me? Yes, she said gently. You are not biologically related to either of the individuals whose DNA you submitted. Which meant one thing. My mother had never cheated. But it also meant something else. Something far more disturbing. I wasn't their daughter. At all. The next morning I drove to my parents' house. I timed it carefully. 10 o'clock. Late enough that my father would be at the golf course. Early enough that my mother would still be home. She was exactly where I expected her to be. In the sunroom. Sitting in the wicker chair beside the window with a cup of chamomile tea. Her robe wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She looked up when I walked in. Elena, she said. Then she saw my face. What's wrong? I didn't say anything. I just handed her my phone. She read the report slowly. Her eyes moved across the screen. Then back again. Then a third time. The color drained from her face. This is wrong. I called the lab, I said quietly. They verified it. Her hands started trembling. But I gave birth to you, she whispered. I know. I remember everything, she said. 14 hours of labor. Your father pacing the hallway. The doctor making jokes to calm me down. Tears filled her eyes. I saw you, Elena. I held you. I knelt beside her chair and took her hands. I believe you. She looked at me desperately. Then how can this be true? I took a breath. There's only one explanation. Her eyes widened. The hospital. The words hung between us like thunder. My mother shook her head slowly. No. The birth record, I reminded her. 11 minutes. Her expression shifted. And suddenly I could see the moment something clicked inside her mind. The clock, she whispered. What? I remember looking at the clock in the delivery room, she said slowly. The contractions were so bad I kept counting the minutes. She closed her eyes. You were born at 11:58 p.m. I pointed to the report on my phone. The birth record says 11:47 p.m. My mother's voice trembled. That means 2 babies, I said. And 1 mistake. The room went silent. Outside, the wind rustled the lemon trees in the courtyard. Inside, my mother started crying. Not the quiet tears I had seen most of my life. These were deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere far deeper. If you're not my daughter, she said between breaths. That means my real daughter is out there somewhere. A woman. 30 years old. Living a life that should have been mine. And somewhere else. There was another mother. Who had unknowingly raised me. My mother covered her mouth. We have to find her. I know. We have to find both of them. I squeezed her hands. We will. I want to pause here for a moment. If you're listening to this story and you've ever felt like you didn't belong in your own family, like something about you never quite fit, I see you. Because the truth about where we come from can change everything. And my story was about to get even more complicated. My father found out about the DNA results before I could explain them. Daniel had seen the email on my mother's phone. Within an hour, my phone rang. I knew it was him before I even answered. Well, my father said immediately. His voice was sharp with excitement. What did the test say? I didn't answer. My silence was enough. He laughed. A loud, triumphant laugh. I knew it. I closed my eyes. Carlos. 28 years, he said. 28 years of people calling me paranoid. He sounded ecstatic. Now I finally have proof. You don't understand? Oh, I understand perfectly, he interrupted. You're not my daughter. I never was, I said quietly. There was a pause. Then he laughed again. I'm sending another email. My stomach dropped. You can't. I absolutely can. Carlos, listen to me. But he had already hung up. Within an hour, the second email arrived. This time the subject line read, The truth. He attached the DNA report. Only the first half. The part showing I wasn't his daughter. He didn't include the second line. The part proving my mother had never cheated. The messages from relatives started again. This time they weren't curious. They were judgmental. I sat on my couch staring at the screen while the notifications kept coming. Then my phone rang again. My grandmother. Elena, she said urgently. I just spoke to your mother. I'm on my way there. Good. Her voice lowered. And we need to talk about the nurse. Margaret Collins? Yes. What about her? My grandmother paused. Then she said something that made my heart skip. I found her address. 3 days later, I called Margaret Collins again. This time I left a message. Mrs. Collins, I said. My name is Elena Ruiz. I know you remember that name. I took a breath. I have DNA evidence proving I'm not biologically related to either of my parents. I let the words sink in. I believe there was a baby switch at St. Augustine Medical Center on June 14, 1996. Silence. Then I said the final thing. I'm not looking to blame anyone. I just want the truth. I paused. But before hanging up, I added one more sentence. If you don't call me back, my next call will be to a lawyer. Then I hung up. And I waited. 1 hour. 2 hours. 3. At 4:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Just one message. Thursday. 2 p.m. Riverbend Diner. San Antonio. Come alone. I stared at the screen. Margaret Collins had been silent for nearly 30 years. Now she was ready to talk. The question was I ready to hear what she had to say? Riverbend Diner sat on the edge of the San Antonio River like it had been there forever. The sign outside flickered slightly in the afternoon sun. Inside, the place smelled like coffee, syrup, and something frying on the grill. Vinyl booths. A jukebox in the corner. Waitresses who called everyone hon. It was the kind of place where secrets probably didn't belong. Which made it the perfect place for one. Margaret Collins was already there when I arrived. She sat in the back corner booth with her back to the wall. She looked smaller than I had imagined. 73 years old, maybe. Her gray hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. But her eyes were sharp. They studied me carefully the moment I walked in. I slid into the seat across from her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said something that made my heart skip. You look just like her. My throat tightened. Like who? Margaret sighed softly. Linda. Your biological mother. The words landed like a physical blow. You know who she is? I whispered. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. I've known for 30 years. The diner noise faded around us. Forks clinking. Coffee pouring. Conversations humming. But at that table, everything felt still. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a worn leather notebook. Its edges were frayed from age. This is my shift log from June 14, 1996, she said. The night you were born. She opened it carefully and slid it across the table. My hands shook as I leaned forward. Her handwriting filled the page. Tight. Precise. And suddenly, the 11 missing minutes had an explanation. 11:47 p.m., baby girl number 1 born to Sophia Ruiz. Healthy. 7 pounds 4 ounces. 11:58 p.m., baby girl number 2 born to Linda Morrison. Healthy. 6 pounds 10 ounces. 12:30 a.m., infants taken for routine cleaning and observation. 2:15 a.m., incident reported. Trainee nurse Carla Bennett mistakenly switched identification bracelets after bathing. 2:40 a.m., meeting with hospital administrator. My breathing stopped as I read the final line. 3:05 a.m., decision made to correct records, not families. Less traumatic for parents. All staff instructed to sign confidentiality agreement. My hands started shaking. They knew, I whispered. Margaret nodded slowly. They knew that night. And they did nothing. They said switching the babies back would traumatize both mothers, she said quietly. You had already been fed. Held. Named. Her voice cracked. The administrator said correcting the paperwork would be easier. I stared at her. They erased our identities. I was 26 years old, she said. They threatened my license. My job. My pension. She swallowed hard. I had 2 small children at home. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. So you stayed quiet. For 30 years. The diner went silent between us. Then I asked the question I had been afraid to ask. Who is the other baby? Margaret pulled out a printed sheet of paper. A social media profile. The photo showed a woman about my age standing in front of a classroom. Brown hair. Warm brown eyes. A small dimple in her left cheek. The resemblance was undeniable. My brother Daniel's face stared back at me in a different form. Her name is Rachel Morrison, Margaret said softly. She's 30 years old. She lives in Springfield, Missouri. I stared at the photo. My mother's biological daughter. My father's real child. Living an entirely different life. Margaret looked at me with tired eyes. And you, she said gently. You're Linda Morrison's daughter. That night I sat at my kitchen table staring at Rachel Morrison's profile. Elementary school teacher. Graduate of Missouri State University. Volunteer at a local animal shelter. The photos showed her laughing with coworkers. Holding puppies. Standing beside two people who had raised her. The parents she believed were hers. I wrote the message 17 times before I finally sent it. Hi Rachel. My name is Elena Ruiz. I know this message is going to sound completely insane, and I'm sorry in advance. We were both born at St. Augustine Medical Center in San Antonio on June 14, 1996. I recently discovered through DNA testing that I am not biologically related to the parents who raised me. A nurse who worked that night confirmed that 2 baby girls were accidentally switched. I believe you are the biological daughter of Carlos and Sofia Ruiz. And I believe I am the biological daughter of Linda Morrison. I have documentation. I have a witness statement. I'm not asking for anything from you. I just believe you deserve to know the truth. If you're willing to talk, my number is below. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I hit send. 24 hours passed. I checked my phone every 10 minutes. Nothing. 30 hours. Still nothing. Then at 9:41 p.m. the next night, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Hello? A hesitant voice replied. Is this Elena? Yes. This is Rachel. My heart started pounding. There was a long pause. Then she spoke again. My whole life people have told me I don't look like my parents. Her voice trembled slightly. My dad used to joke that maybe the hospital mixed babies. She let out a shaky laugh. I guess it wasn't a joke after all. We talked for 3 hours that night. About everything. Our childhoods. Our families. The strange feeling both of us had always carried. Like we were slightly out of place in our own lives. By the end of the call, we agreed on one thing. Another DNA test. One that compared Rachel directly with Carlos and Sofia Ruiz. If the results confirmed the truth, everything would change. The test results would arrive in 10 days. Just in time for my engagement party. And when they did, my father would finally learn what 28 years of certainty had really cost him. The engagement party was held at my grandmother's house. She insisted on it. The Ruiz family has embarrassed itself enough in public places, she had said with a sharp look toward my father. This time we do things properly. My grandmother's home sat on the outskirts of San Antonio, a sprawling Spanish-style estate surrounded by rose gardens and tall oak trees draped with twinkling lights. The backyard had been transformed into something out of a movie. White lanterns. Long tables with linen cloths. Soft music drifting through hidden speakers. Nearly 60 guests arrived that evening. Relatives. Family friends. Coworkers. Every single person who had received my father's humiliating email. Nathan stayed close beside me, his hand resting gently on the small of my back. You okay? He whispered. I nodded. But inside, my heart was racing. Because everything was ready. The documents. The witness. The truth. And in the guest room just inside the house, Rachel Morrison was waiting. Waiting to meet the parents who had spent 30 years searching for someone who had never been missing. Halfway through the evening, my father arrived. Late. Of course. Carlos Ruiz always made an entrance. He stepped into the garden wearing a tailored charcoal suit, his expensive watch catching the light of the lanterns. He looked around the party with the quiet confidence of a man who believed he had already won. Relatives greeted him warmly. A few even clapped him on the shoulder. You've handled all of this with such dignity, one aunt told him. My father smiled modestly. But I knew that smile. He was enjoying this. Enjoying the validation. Enjoying the whispers. enjoying the belief that his suspicions had finally been proven right. My brother Daniel stood beside him. Uncomfortable, but silent. In the corner of the garden, Margaret Collins sat quietly with a glass of water in her hand. Her eyes followed my father like a shadow. 30 years of silence weighing on her shoulders. Nathan leaned closer. "It's time," he murmured. I nodded. And then, right on cue, my father cleared his throat. He stepped onto the small wooden platform near the garden fountain. The same one we had set up for toasts. "Everyone," he called. The conversation faded instantly. Carlos Ruiz loved an audience. "I'd like to say a few words." People turned toward him. Glasses paused midair. Nathan squeezed my hand. My father smiled proudly. "First of all," he began, "congratulations to Nathan for marrying into our family." A few people laughed politely. Then his gaze found me. "And Elena, of course." He paused. "There's been a lot of speculation lately." A murmur moved through the crowd. "I asked Elena to take a DNA test," he continued. "And she finally did." The room went silent. My mother stood stiffly near the back of the crowd, my grandmother holding her hand. "But for some reason," my father continued, "she hasn't shared the results." He reached into his jacket. I thought I'd help. He unfolded a piece of paper slowly. "The same report. The incomplete one." Daniel looked down at the ground. "I was able to obtain a copy," my father said proudly. He raised the page. "According to this report." His voice grew louder. "Elena Ruiz shares 0% DNA with Carlos Ruiz." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My mother closed her eyes. 28 years, my father continued. 28 years I have said something wasn't right." He turned toward my mother. "You lied to me, Sophia." My stomach tightened. "And now," he said coldly, "everyone knows what kind of woman you really are." The silence that followed was absolute. Then I started walking. Step by step. Toward the platform. Toward the man who had spent nearly 3 decades destroying my mother's reputation. He looked surprised when I reached him. But he handed me the microphone without thinking. "You're right about one thing, Carlos," I said calmly. The crowd leaned closer. "The DNA test proves I'm not your daughter." His smile widened. But then I continued. "And I'm not Mom's daughter either." The smile disappeared. Confused murmurs spread through the crowd. I turned toward the side door of the house. "Rachel," I called softly. The door opened. Rachel Morrison stepped into the garden. Brown hair. Brown eyes. A face that looked uncannily like Daniel's. The resemblance was immediate. Unmistakable. People began whispering. Someone dropped a glass. "This is Rachel Morrison," I said. "She was born 11 minutes before me at St. Augustine Medical Center." The crowd went completely still. "The night we were born, a trainee nurse switched 2 babies." My father's face drained of color. "And the hospital decided covering it up would be easier than fixing it." I gestured toward the screen Nathan had set up earlier. The display lit up. Rachel's DNA report appeared. 99.98% match with Carlos Ruiz. 99.97% match with Sofia Ruiz. "She is your biological daughter." The words echoed across the garden. My father stared at Rachel. Really stared. And I watched the certainty drain from his face. 28 years of absolute confidence collapsing in real time. Margaret Collins stood slowly. "My name is Margaret Collins," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I was the head nurse that night." She held up her notarized statement. "Mrs. Ruiz never betrayed her husband." The crowd shifted. "She never cheated." My father grabbed the edge of the platform. His knuckles turned white. "You wanted science," I said quietly. Now you have it. For a moment, he just stared at Rachel. Then his knees buckled. Carlos Ruiz collapsed onto the platform. Right there in front of 60 witnesses. The man who had spent 3 decades accusing my mother of betrayal now knelt in the middle of the garden. His chest heaving. His world shattered. I didn't know, he whispered hoarsely. How could I have known? You could have trusted her, I said. The crowd was silent. You could have believed the woman you married. My voice carried clearly through the garden. But you didn't. Across the lawn, a chair scraped loudly. Daniel stood up. For a second I thought he would defend our father. Instead he walked straight past him. Past the platform. And toward my mother. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Then he hugged her. My father watched it all from his knees. His family choosing each other. Without him. And for the first time in my life. Carlos Ruiz looked small. For nearly 30 years, my father had been certain. Certain that my mother had betrayed him. Certain that I was proof of it. Certain that his anger was justified. That his suspicion made him righteous. That someday science would prove he had been right all along. Now science had spoken. And it had destroyed everything he believed about his life. Carlos Ruiz stayed on his knees for a long time. The garden was silent except for the soft rustling of the trees overhead. Then my mother stepped forward. Slowly. Her heels clicked softly against the stone pathway as she walked toward the platform. For decades she had lived under the weight of my father's accusations. Whispers at family gatherings. Cold silences at dinner. Nights spent crying quietly in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed. Now every person who had ever doubted her was standing there watching. She stopped in front of him. 30 years, Carlos. Her voice was calm. Steady. Stronger than I had ever heard it. 30 years I told you the truth. My father looked up at her, his face pale. Sophia. She raised her hand. Not yet. The entire garden held its breath. You owe me an apology, she said. Her voice didn't shake. You owe Elena an apology for every birthday you ignored, every moment you made her feel like she didn't belong in her own family. She gestured toward Rachel. And you owe Rachel an apology for the father she should have had all along. My father's shoulders trembled. I didn't know, he whispered again. No, my mother said quietly. You didn't want to know. She turned away from him. And walked toward Rachel. Rachel looked frozen. Tears streamed down her face as my mother stopped in front of her. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then my mother reached out and touched her cheek. Hello, she said softly. I'm your mother. Rachel broke into sobs. They hugged each other tightly. 30 years of missed birthdays. Missed school plays. Missed bedtime stories. All colliding in that one moment. Behind them, my father slowly stood. It took him 2 tries. When he finally reached the microphone again, his voice sounded completely different. Hoarse. Broken. I was wrong. 3 words. But they echoed across the entire garden. I was wrong about Sophia, he continued. She never betrayed me. He swallowed hard. I accused her for nearly 3 decades, and I was wrong. Then he turned toward me. Elena. I took things from you that I can never give back. My chest tightened. Your childhood, he said. Your trust. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. I'll repay your student loans. I blinked in surprise. All of them. It's not enough, he admitted. But it's a start. Then he turned toward Rachel. My daughter, he said quietly. You're my daughter, and I missed everything. His voice cracked. Your childhood. Your graduations. Your life. Rachel wiped her tears. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she stepped forward. "We can start now," she said softly. "But only if you stop being a judge, and start being a father." My father nodded slowly, unable to speak. My grandmother stepped forward and handed him a handkerchief. "Pull yourself together, Carlos," she said. "You've got a lot of work to do." 2 months later, I married Nathan Miller. The ceremony took place in my grandmother's rose garden. White flowers, fairy lights, soft music drifting through the warm Texas evening. This time, the entire family was there. Both families. The one that raised me, and the one I had just discovered. My mother walked me down the aisle. Not my father. My mother. She wore a pale champagne dress and held her head higher than I had ever seen it. For the first time in decades, there was no weight on her shoulders. Rachel stood beside my bridesmaids in a deep emerald dress. Our eyes met as I walked past her. She smiled. And I realized that even though we had only known each other a few weeks, she already felt like my sister. Linda Morrison, my biological mother, sat in the front row. When she caught my eye, she pressed her hand to her heart. I smiled back. Because love, it turns out, doesn't care how long it takes to find you. After the ceremony, my grandmother raised her champagne glass. "This wedding," she said proudly, "isn't just about two people. It's about truth." She looked around at the gathered families. Truth that took 30 years to surface. She lifted her glass. "To truth." "To truth," everyone echoed. And for the first time in my life, our family finally felt whole. The lawsuit against the hospital took nearly a year. Rachel and I filed it together. Margaret Collins testified about the night we were born. The hospital's lawyers tried to dismiss it. But during discovery, internal emails surfaced. Documents showing the administration knew about the mistake. Documents showing they chose to hide it. In the end, the hospital settled. Each family received $450,000. More importantly, the hospital issued a public apology and implemented new newborn identification protocols. Margaret Collins wrote me a letter afterward. Her handwriting was shaky but clear. "Thank you for giving me the courage to finally tell the truth. I can finally sleep again." I keep that letter in the same folder as my birth certificate. The real one. The one that tells the truth. 6 months after the wedding, my father invited me to dinner. Just the two of us. A quiet Italian restaurant in downtown Austin. No country club. No audience. Just a candlelit table and 2 glasses of wine. He looked older. Smaller somehow. "I'm in therapy," he told me. "Your mother insisted." I nodded. "We're trying to see if there's anything left to save." I thought about my mother. About how strong she had been. "I remember when you taught me to ride a bike," I said. "I was 5. His eyes filled with tears. "I remember. That's the father I needed," I told him. The one who held on. I took a breath. "Forgiveness is a process, Carlos." He nodded. "I know. I'm willing to try," I said. "But you have a lot of work to do." "I will," he promised quietly. "However long it takes." I'm sitting in our apartment now as I tell the story. Nathan is in the kitchen trying to cook something complicated. Rachel and Daniel are arguing about music in the living room. My mother and Linda Morrison meet for lunch once a month. They call each other the other mother. Life has a strange way of rearranging itself. For 30 years I tried to prove I was a Ruiz. Straightening my hair darker. Learning golf because my father loved it. Trying to fit into a family that never quite felt like mine. Now I know something important. DNA doesn't make a family. Love does. And if this story meant something to you, if you've ever been accused of something you didn't do, if you've ever been judged by someone who should have trusted you, Then remember this. The truth has a way of finding its way to the surface. Sometimes it takes 30 years. Sometimes it takes a DNA test. But it always comes out. If you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe to Women Reddit Stories. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Because stories like this remind us of one simple truth. Trust is a choice. And doubt can destroy a family.